Are you ready to unlock your full potential and maximize your productivity? Look no further than Productivity Smarts, the ultimate audio podcast hosted by renowned productivity expert Gerald J. Leonard. In every episode, Gerald shares captivating stories, invaluable tips, and cutting-edge strategies that will transform the way you approach productivity. Whether you're looking to reduce stress, overcome overwhelm, or simply get more done in less time, Productivity Smarts has got you covered. But that's not all. You'll also gain inspiration from real-life success stories of individuals who have achieved greatness through productivity. Plus, you'll learn the latest tools, techniques, and habits that will help you achieve a new level of happiness and fulfillment in your personal and professional life. So why wait? Join us every week as we delve into the exciting world of productivity and help you unleash your full potential. Get ready to take your productivity to the next level with Productivity Smarts. As a productivity expert and host of the Productivity Smarts podcast, Gerald J. Leonard has been a proud supporter of Kiva since 2011. Kiva is a non-profit organization that helps entrepreneurs in third world countries access the capital they need to start or grow their businesses. By making a small loan through Kiva, you can help these entrepreneurs achieve their dreams, support their families, and contribute to their local economies. And with a repayment rate of over 96%, your loan can be re-lent to another entrepreneur once it's repaid, creating a ripple effect of positive change. So if you're looking for a meaningful way to make a difference in the world, consider making a loan through Kiva. With loans as small as $25, anyone can be a micro-lender and help change lives. Visit kiva.org to learn more and start lending today.
Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Daisy Khan on the topic of how to create long-term social change using a four-pronged change theory. Now, Dr. Khan has received over 20 awards, including the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award, the Edinburgh Peace Award, and recognized as one of 21 women of the 21st century by the Woman's E! News. Time magazine mentioned her in 100 Most Influential Leaders and featured her in a 9/11 portrait of resilience. The Huffington Post listed her among the top 10 women faith leaders and described as a link between modern Islam and the West by More magazine. She holds a special place among the 100 most notable American Muslims by the Interfaith Institute of Long Island. Dr. Khan, how are you?
Yeah, how are you, Gerald? Very nice to be with you and your lovely audience.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation. I read your bio. I scanned your website, and based on the conversation we had before, I was really looking forward to our conversation today. And we'll get into this topic of creating long-term sustainable social change, which is really important during this time. It's always there's something always kind of going on in history, but I think at this time there's a particular need for this understanding of this four-pronged change theory that for companies, for individuals, for society as a whole. But before I get into that, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
Which I ask all of my guests. And that is, what is your favorite style of music?
Oh, my God. How did you ask me that question? Because when I was a young girl, I was an aspiring musician, meaning I thought I had a voice. But I grew up in a culture in Kashmir, in the foothills of the Himalayas, north of India. And there was no profession for women in music. So music was just something that you did in your shower. Right. So I begged my father to buy me a guitar. He was a public servant and he just had to save the money, get me a guitar. And I was a child of the 60s. And, I was basically singing Beatles songs and everybody was listening to my songs. So that's how I got started. And the music was mostly I was exposed to rock and roll and all this other stuff until I came to America.
Okay.
And I was a single woman. And then I was introduced to this new form of music, which I found so fascinating. It was called jazz. and, and all of a sudden, I realized this is the music I like the best because it was people were gathered in a tiny little room.
Yep.
And there was this intimacy between the musician and the audience. And I felt like, because I'm a creative person, so I felt like I was a sense of like my own creativity was being expressed through the music.
Yes.
And I was having this connection in this dark little room in the Blue Note
Okay.
in Manhattan.
That's a great place to hear jazz.
That was my go-to place. And I have every CD of every Ellington. And I just got, and whenever I want to relax, that's where I go. So jazz is something that I've developed a taste for. And it's really soulful. I think it's also because it speaks to my soul and I'm a spiritual being.
Yeah.
So it resonates with me. And it's a breathing, living form of art. And then, there are some Muslim jazz musicians.
Yes.
That I got exposed to. And there's a gentleman named Ulmer Blood, and he was a jazz guitarist.
Yeah.
And he actually took verses of the Quran and played them in a jazz form.
Oh, wow.
And nobody knew that. It was incredible. So I've developed a real taste for jazz.
That's awesome. That is
Thank
awesome.
you.
As you can see from behind me, you can't. The listeners can't see my room, but if they
I can see all the instruments there.
They see all the instruments behind me. I'm a jazz musician, so
you're a jazz musician.
That speaks to me very well. So yes.
Okay. All right.
Excellent. Well, listen, I read your bio, or at least some of the awards that you've received, and you have been like. It blows me away to some of the people and organizations that have recognized you for the work that you've done and the impact that you've had. How did you get started in your field, and what do you think has made you so successful throughout your career?
Yeah, well, I didn't start out this way. I came to America to pursue an education in the arts. My parents sent me here because there was no future for me there in terms of studying art. So I was an architectural designer for the first 25 years of my life. Then I married a spiritual teacher and a guide. And, our mosque was in Tribeca and the towers fell when 9/11 happened. And with that falling of the towers and the tragedy that unfolded, a mandate was thrust upon him as well as by extension on me. And I had to quit my career because the demand was so great on reaching out to Americans, explaining who we were and who we were not, more importantly.
Right.
And because the perceptions about Islam and Muslims was getting shaped by the press and the media and by the actions of the terrorists. And so we had to do that work. And so I think it was a divine intervention and a calling that I felt was being thrust upon me to rise up. Right. And to build a community. And because previously I was building buildings for large corporations and working in the corporate sector. So I thought to myself, they don't need me. I can be replaced in a heartbeat. And but my community needs me. So I made that decision, not realizing that this was going to be my life's work, because I thought, I'll do it for a little while. And then I've never looked back. So wow. Because the work is so meaningful. It's challenging, but it's very energizing. Like, these are very difficult times, as you know, we're living in very difficult times, uncertain times, right? And people often tell me, why are you still so, why are you still like, why aren't you depressed? I'm like, because I have so much work to do. I'm just focused on the work I need to do. Right. I have no time to think about.
Exactly. I'm so busy about my purpose. I don't have time to get depressed about
change.
The little things that are going on. That's really cool. So I do have to ask you this question, because you said you were in the arts, and then you pivoted towards that. You studied architecture, right? Yeah. And that for 20 plus years you were designing and building buildings, right?
Yeah.
For large corporations. And now you're designing and building communities and educating people around the Islamic community and so on. how do you think the experience of that 20-year journey, right, of crafting buildings and thinking about foundations and structures and all the things that go into building a building, how do you feel like that has informed your work that now you're doing on a humanistic level or social level or spiritual level of building a community?
Yep. Wow, what a beautiful question. It's actually one of my favorite questions because it pretty much, describes why my work is so transformative, is because I use the same philosophies and the same process that I would in the design work, just like you would with, creating a piece of lyrics or something. You have the notes. So in our business, we have to kind of like test the soil, to lay the foundation, you have to test the soil. So I see the testing of the soil as what's the problem? What's the root of the problem? Is the root good? Where is the problem? Is the root strong enough to hold a foundation? And then once I'm done with figuring out what is at the root of this and what is the root cause of this, only then can I envision something that I'm going to fix or affix and to create a structure around it.
Right.
And the structure is all about creating the foundation. So laying the foundation is about what is the foundation of this thing? Like, what is it going to stand on? So for me, the foundation is all about education, removing ignorance, informing people. And if I'm doing social change of changing hearts and minds, that's how I would do it. So that's the foundation. And then once you have the structure, then you create the structure, you create the spaces around it, you create the different portals that people can walk through, right? Just imagine a building, you have different portals. You're going to the cafeteria, you're eating, you're going to the conference room, you're chatting. So each space is created for you're working, you're educating, you're dining together. So all of the human interactions that take place in real life are also happening in the social change. And then finally, because I have an artistic eye, whatever I'm doing has to be kind of like aesthetically sealed.
Okay.
It has to look beautiful. So whether it's a conference or whether it's a toolkit I'm creating, it has to have some sense of beauty to it because beauty attracts people, right? Beauty is so attracting to people. And so this is whether I'm doing a conference or I'm doing a dialogue, these elements all have to be in there. So this is the skill that I took from corporate America, the skills that and also strategic planning. All right, where's the money going to come from, right? Where's the money going to come from? Yeah, the strategic planning to how to build a building. Where's the money going to come from? So all of these elements I learned, I brought those skills. And that's why I was up and running very quickly because I used those skills that I had developed in the corporate sector into my work, in my social change work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because you already really had the foundation, and unbeknownst to yourself, you had been practicing and preparing for this work at a corporate level with, I'm sure, $1 billion or $1 million buildings that you were building and learning how to work with contractors and other executive stakeholders and government officials and states and permits and all the different those complexities so that now as you found yourself in this new line of work, creating another kind of building, if you will, it gave you all of those backgrounds. And the title that we have here is, how do you create long-term sustainable social change using a four-pronged change theory? Can you describe for us, what is this four-pronged change theory?
Yeah. So for the kind of social change that I was doing, it was important to have four elements to it. And there are, of course, many more elements that you can have, but the four elements are key. And this is where I talk about holistic change, right? Because change has to be holistic. It cannot, people think that, oh, I'm going to change, so I'm going to go do protests, right? So oftentimes people think they can go protest and that's what's going to bring the change. No, you have so many stakeholders. You have to know who the stakeholders are. And there has to be a different prong change for each of those stakeholders.
Different message.
So for my work, education is absolutely essential. So educating, removing ignorance, providing knowledge, educating people so people themselves get empowered about that particular subject, that, that inner power that people get from being educated, being informed. So that requires a lot of research. It might be position papers, it might be trainings, it might be webinars, it could be any type of education. So information that people are lacking.
Right.
Then the second prong is once you've gotten this education piece done, then bringing many more people to collaborate around this change. So that might be a conference. That might be a large-scale conference where you're now sharing this information. Okay. And by the way, this is the real stuff that I've done. So, you issue a position paper on a particular topic. Now you want to share this with all your stakeholders. So where are all the stakeholders? They're spread out everywhere. So you bring them, you do a convening, you bring all these people together, and now you have a meeting of the minds.
Right.
Everybody is reading from the same script. Everybody is now understanding what to do with this information. Then you take that out into the communities and you communicate that out. So communication is the third one. Collaboration is the second one. Communication is the third one, which is communicating it with one another, sharing it with one another, or even communicating it through media. If that's what your change needs, you need to inform the media. So you inform the media, or you communicate through a fantastic website that you've created, or in this day and age, it might be the podcast, which is what we are doing, right? Exactly. It could be the podcast. This is how you communicate. You communicate with the platforms and the means that you have. And finally, take that idea and make it actionable. So actionable is where the real action is. Literally, people, foot soldiers on the ground, doing and creating this awareness and sharing and working with one another, workshops and all those other things, going person to person. So I'll give you an example of one thing.
Okay.
So we had an issue with female genital mutilation in Africa, and a woman reached out to me, and she was at one of our conferences, and she said, we have to change the hearts and minds of people because they think this practice is an Islamic practice. And I said, well, it's not Islamic. She said, well, but I need evidence. I need you to tell me how it's not. So we did a position paper. It took us 6 months to do the research. We brought scholars together, we brought activists together, and we put a very robust, well-researched, evidence-based paper together. And we hand-delivered the paper to her. She went with that paper and she started speaking with religious leaders because she knew that they were the most influential people in the community.
Right.
So she then, engaged them, started communicating with them and sharing the information with them. They were so moved by the research. They said, oh, we are issuing a decree against FGM right now. Now that she had this decree, she had this powerful, a yes from these religious scholars and leaders who had a lot of influence in the community. She was able to run with that and go from imam to imam and sheikh to sheikh in her community. And from 2011 to 2018, she was doing that. Literally, it was like, going from person to person and creating the action on the ground. And finally, in 2018, I was invited to Gambia, and Gambia banned the practice. And the vice president of Gambia said to me, this was the missing piece of the puzzle that we desperately needed. Without this position paper, we wouldn't have been able to do this at all. So this is what I mean by holistic change, permanent change. Right. Now, just last year, there was one religious leader who was very angry that this practice was banned. So he tried to reinstate it. But we had educated so many people on the ground, the nurses, the practitioners, the women themselves, the activists, the religious leaders. Nobody listened to him, and the case was closed. So this is what I mean by long-term, sustainable social change, that where you change not only the minds, but also the hearts of people.
Exactly. That sounds like an amazing process. So, you think about what you just went through. One of the core things that you did, and I like what you started off with, which was education, right? And obviously that required funding, that required research, that required time, that required collaboration, even at that moment with other experts to identify, but then to also take all of that knowledge and put it in a way that the people who would be sharing it could share it in a way that was clear, right? Because sometimes, education information is put together and it's put together for the technician or the engineer or the high level person. And then when someone who's a commoner, if you will, gets it and has to go out and share it with their influencers, they have a struggle. They struggle with that, right? And so the message doesn't get carried on. It doesn't get portrayed. But it's like that the educational component and the collaboration component work so well together that even when you are the others who put the information together weren't there, they were still able to understand it to a point that they could communicate it really clearly, which means that one, you guys really understood it because, kind of like what Einstein says, someone who's really smart can take something that's very complicated and make it where the masses really can understand. When it comes to, let's just break this down for people who are listening, right? Because not everyone who's listening is focused on a large social change effort, but they may be focused on changes that they need to make on a personal level.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think if they look at this four-pronged approach and follow it the same way, by one, educating themselves and people around them, figuring out who to collaborate with, figuring out how to communicate what they're trying to do to get the resources and the support that they need, and then to begin to take action. How do you see just the everyday person who's listening to this being able to take this information and apply it to themselves?
Yeah. Well, this is one of the most important questions that I've been asked lately because, we are such a polarized nation right now, and people don't know how to even communicate across divides.
Right.
I remember recently a gentleman told me that he wasn't going to go home for Christmas. And I said, why? He said, well, my father voted for X, Y, and Z, and I voted for X, Y, and Z, or Y and Z. And he says, and we can't talk to one another. I felt that was so sad.
Yeah.
That was so sad. Imagine him, his grandchild, they're not able to even see one another. Anyway, so this is the state we're in, right? And that's why people were dreading Thanksgiving because they don't know how to speak to one another. So I think that first people need to understand that it's really hard to change hearts and minds.
Yeah.
And first you have to consider the people's emotions, meaning there has to be non-judgmental listening where you validate the person's emotions. That's the most important thing to help them kind of like get away from that polarized thinking to having to create a safe space where they can share their narrative without you passing a judgment on them. So active listening is usually the first one. And I tested this, in my own family, and it works. Just listen to the other person. You don't even have to say anything. You just like curious to see where they're coming from and just leave it at that. Secondly, I think it's really important then to say that because it's hard to change beliefs, because people perceive that as a psychological threat.
Right.
And their self-image might get triggered because they're connected to that image, right? Because they have a stake in that image, or they have bought into that image. And so you have to present your perspective by framing it using their values, their beliefs, and even their emotions that they already hold. Then the third one, which is more complicated, is that people have sticky identities. Sticky meaning that there are some identities that they cannot change at all.
Right.
So they are wedded to that identity. It might come from a grievance that they have, like a trauma, it could be a generational trauma, right? That they are wedded to that identity. So you can't tell them, oh, I want you to now get rid of who you are, and I want you to adopt mine. So you have to understand that there are certain identities they cannot get away from and work around that.
Yeah.
And then when you are bringing them new information, you have to bring that new information, or you're combating information. Like oftentimes people will combat something and say, here's what New York Times said, but they're speaking to a person who doesn't even respect New York Times, right? So you have to provide them with information, with something that they feel is a legitimate source.
Right.
So in the case of Palestinian-Israeli issue, if I were to share something with my Jewish friends, I'd use Haaretz in the newspaper that is a very credible newspaper in Israel. Say, this is what Haaretz said. That's a source that they believe is a credible source, right, rather than something that they believe is not credible. And then finally, there's something called social norms, which people, you have to acknowledge that there are social norms. So people often have to go back into communities that they belong to.
Yeah.
Because they have a social network. So in the case of white supremacy, you may say, oh, well, why do you think like this? Or you may even convince that person that their viewpoint about minorities is wrong. And that person, you finally got them emotionally. But that person, is going to be hard for them to give up everything because they have to go back to their tribe,
right?
The tribe that they live in. So
right.
What are they going to do? Are they going to leave their entire tribe? Are they going to leave their family? Are they going to leave everybody behind and adopt your point of view? So these are some of the things that one has to know going in.
Yep.
But work with people. I think that everybody wants to be heard, everybody wants to be valued, and everybody wants to be respected.
Yes. Yes.
If you can do that as a starter, that's usually a good start.
Exactly. It reminds me of a book that I read and actually did a certification in. Lady name was Judith Glaser, and she wrote a book called Conversational Intelligence. I'm not sure if I had a chance to read that one yet, but it's an amazing book. And a lot of what you're talking about reminds me of conversational intelligence. And the idea behind conversational intelligence is it's really hard to move someone to a different perspective or getting on the same page with you if they are emotionally committed to something else.
Yeah.
Right. And if they see what you're saying as a threat to where they stand, then
exactly.
And what happens is it's not even just about the emotions, because at the end of the day, from a neurological standpoint, emotions are just chemicals, right?
Yeah.
It's that
exactly.
they are committed to these chemical reactions and feelings that they have developed because of their beliefs that are impacting how they think, how they feel. It's actually impacting their genes in their body and just their whole position. And so if you go into a conversation and you're trying to educate and collaborate, but you're not taking in consideration what the other person's positions are and where they stand and how they're dealing with life, and you don't try to move them in a non-threatening way to a more positive outlook that's more coordinated and collaborated where we're working together, then it becomes almost impossible to move them off of that particular view they may have to a view that becomes really positive, or a view that where you're beginning to now co-create a new reality around a particular topic or a new stance or a new situation. And it sounds like the story you told earlier, where you work with a team and you put the paper together and then you socialized it with the lady and she went and shared it with all the influencers of her community, was that it allowed her, you guys took what you had, but you put it in a way that she could embrace it.
Yeah.
And then
exactly.
Because she had that connection with the rest of the community and they didn't see her as a threat, but as an advocate. They saw her as someone bringing new insight and wisdom, but emotionally they were committed to her as well. Where if she was a person that they resisted already, you could have given her the best research in the world. Could have been Harvard and Oxford and all the other Ivy Leagues or whatever, and it would have never moved anything. But it was because there was an emotional connection there with her that she was able to then at least get them to put down their guard, right? And then
very right. Yeah, it's not the message, it's the messenger that's even more important than the message.
It really is because within one of the theories behind conversational intelligence is that within 0.07 seconds when we start a conversation, just the energy that's impacted, right, that's just carried out, from an intuitive standpoint whether the person you're talking to is for or against you.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, they're genuinely concerned about having an engaging conversation, or they're setting you up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a woman of faith, and I always look at scripture for some of these solutions. And if you look at what the prophets they came to topple the tyranny,
Right.
and they came with a radical message. And many of them were not accepted initially.
Right.
They were rejected by their own people who even knew them, family members and other people. So, but eventually, as they built trust and as they were communicating and more followers were coming, and big people begin to see, oh, more and more people are adopting this message. So then it becomes a tribal thing. Then people were like, I don't want to be left behind in this tribal, because everybody, people are like sheep. They need a shepherd.
Right.
And if you have a good shepherd carrying the message, and everybody then jumps on the thing. But I think if you can show people the shared goals that you have, and in the position papers that we did, we made sure that there was enough emotion inserted in there. So like telling the story of a young girl who has gone through this and the consequences of what has happened to her and her life, those move people as well, because then people feel like, oh my God. So it's not just reinforcing the logic, but also using emotion equally. Then also, like you said, if you tailor your message to the people, like go to where people are at, rather than speak down to people, speak to the people at the level. And this is about creating the messaging and, taking your 30-page position paper, which is scholarly written, and turning it into a 2-page pamphlet so that, an eighth grader can read it. Right.
Exactly.
So these are some of the things in the nonprofit world that we do. We take complex things, we simplify them so that for easy consumption.
Exactly. Now, when it comes to, and this kind of ties into where this next question I have is around resistance and overcoming resistance to change. Because initially, when any change is brought about, the majority of us, we can be against it, or we can take on the idea or look at it. Mm-hmm. But our first reaction is, wait a minute, you're asking me to change. And it's kind of like I always kind of get the vision of the dog. You're taking the dog walk, and it's like putting his paws down, and it's like, I'm not, no, I don't want to go outside. It's too dark, or it's too wet, or whatever. We have that gut reaction that way. So when it comes resistance to change, obviously it hinders progress, right?
Yeah.
So what strategies, as you're going through this process, what strategies that you advocate for that are used in this change theory to help individuals and leaders address the challenge to reduce that resistance and also not to lose momentum in their
Yeah, I think that resistance to change is a real issue, because that's why when I said you check the soil, you have to say, where is this resistance coming from? What's the root cause of this? So identifying the root cause of that resistance, where does it stem from? Does it stem from fear of the unknown? It's usually fear of the unknown. Lack of understanding. In the case of Islam, people don't have any understanding of Islam. They've just seen terrible images of perceived threat.
Right.
People who are white supremacists, who basically are against all minorities, are perceiving all of us as a threat to them and to white Christians. Right. And that's how they see it's for them. It's their position is going to somehow be threatened. And so understanding where that opposition is coming from will allow you to create the solution, the right kind of solution.
Right.
So that's one. Then I think that building trust and relationships is the second. And this is what I did a lot with my work when I first began working with the Jewish community, because there was a lot of distrust. They didn't know where we were coming from. And of course, things in the Middle East just complicated that.
Right.
Showing that we have common concerns in America as two minority communities, and what knowing one another could benefit us from. What do we gain from getting to know one another, and acknowledging those difficult discomfort, that people have one another openly. like
Right.
being very transparent about it. And that's what the dialogue work is all about.
Gotcha.
So when you are trying to get to know one another, literally break bread with somebody,
Mm,
like get to know them at a personal level. Like
yes.
it would be, for me, it would be like amazing if I just went and befriended a person that was in complete opposition to me over just let's break some bread and see what happens.
Right.
And yeah, I think we would get to know that, first get to know each other as human beings, find out something about their family, find out what is in common. What do you have in common? Oftentimes you'll find something that you have in common that you can build a relationship from. And that's usually the first couple of, then of course, then you can start addressing misconceptions. What misconceptions do you have about me? I want to answer these. But then listening is important, just listening them, hearing them out. And then, of course, it goes into the work we already do, educating them,
Right.
educating yourself about them. And I think in the case of United States right now, creating a sense of urgency that this is really needed.
Yep.
Right? Because everybody knows this is not sustainable. This division that we have in this country is not sustainable. It's not good for the country. And make the case for the change. Like,
Right.
let's why do we need to create a change? Like, why did Donald Trump win? He kept using the same thing, make America great again. And it to his followers, it felt like a new vision was being created, right?
Right.
And we know that those were just words, but there was a painting of a compelling picture of what you would gain from this.
Right.
And so that also has to be done in the case of people who are doing social change. You have to create that sense of urgency of what are you going to get? What kind of vision do you want to have for the future? And I think that's what brings people together.
Exactly. Exactly. I like when you first started off on this particular question, you said, well, that's why I said you got to look at the soil, right?
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
like before you even, I mean, think about it this way, before you even start the project, it's not being a naysayer, it's just being realistic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Saying, like, okay, before we even look at breaking ground or even putting one line on the blueprint, what are we actually working with? Right? What are
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
working with, and how what's the viability, doing our feasibility research, if you will.
Exactly.
And
Feasibility study.
exactly. And I love that because, by knowing what are the resistors in the market or for your service or for your company or for your goal that you're going after, stepping back, because many times, especially when it comes to someone who's wanting to create social change or create an amazing project or amazing goal, is that we look at all the positives and we jump headlong and we kind of figure out like, well, I'll learn how to fly as I I'll jump and learn how to fly on the way down.
Right.
Many times you need to go like, wait a minute, let me make sure I got the right wings on or I got the right suit on that's going to catch the air. And
Yeah.
you think things through from that perspective. So I love that idea of, doing that risk management and issue management up front and
Yeah.
then building with your eyes wide open and not with
Yeah.
rose-colored glasses, right? Because change in itself, even within a company or a family or an individual, can be, you're going to have that resistance that just comes up anyway. But when you have massive change or large scale change, that can become even more difficult. When I think about the change theory, how do you align that with people's goals and purposes?
Yeah.
So when someone says, hey, here's how I'm trying to go with my life or my purpose, and they're trying to, again, enroll others, what are some other things they can apply to this change theory that you've shared?
Yeah. Well, there's a beautiful verse in my scripture, the Quran. It says the condition of a people does not change unless they change what is in themselves.
Mm. Okay.
So change usually starts with the self. If you are trying to create a change, this is why some of the greatest leaders have been faith leaders that have done a lot of spiritual work on themselves.
Yeah.
And they can move mountains because they are ready for that, because they're ready to share that light that they have inside of them with the rest of the world. And the world responds to them very quickly. Like in the case of America, Martin Luther King, Dr. King would be a great great leader. And I think that finding out where you're at in your own life and what is the purpose that you were born with
Yeah.
and what is the mandate that is being thrust upon you first is the work that we have to do at an individual level, like finding your own soil, right? Finding your own inner demons, or what is it that you are trying to do? Like oftentimes I'll have young people come to me and they all want to change the world, right? Young people want to change the world. I don't want to work here. This is not this thing. So I'm like, just start with yourself. Just try,
Right.
just start a little baby project. And then just, if you want to just, I remember when I was working and I still hadn't done this work. And I thought to myself, I need to give back. And I remember going to just putting out feelers in Harlem, and a mother came to me and she said, I have 2 children. I need them to be tutored and I'm working on Saturdays. And it would be great if you could take my 2 children on a Saturday afternoon and tutor them. And this way I can work. It was, for me, this was like, I'm like, done. I'm done. I'm perfect. And these 2 children, 2 young girls came to me. They would sit with me. I made, a hot cocoa for them. Something small like that. That's all. Because that once you do that project, it's going to encourage you and inspire you to do more.
Yes.
So usually people have to start with community work,
Right.
volunteering, starting with something, and then you build yourself up to the bigger change. And then you can take on the world, and then you can go in there and create the big change. I think if you are a leader, you have to then lead by example.
Yes.
And inspire others to also follow suit. So this is the work that leaders can do, but people who are just starting out have to start with something small in that is within their capacity.
Yes, I love that because it actually leads me to the last question I have for you on my list of questions, and it's about scaling change while maintaining efficiency. And I'll go back to what you just said there before I ask you the question, because it really does start with yourself. It's kind of like, whatever change you are saying you want to see out in the world, the first thing you have to do is look in the mirror and go, am I being the change that I want to see?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And sometimes it starts with, you think about, I'm going to go back to the initial list of accolades that I read about you, Time Magazine, 100 Women, blah, blah, blah. It's like, wait a minute, she started off mentoring 2 young girls in Harlem.
Exactly. Babysitting and tutoring them while her mother was working.
Exactly.
That was like, it was so golden for me. It felt like I was doing such monumental work.
Right.
And meanwhile, I was just giving a mother a little reprieve, and I was taking care of her children and giving them, and it was within my capacity.
Right.
I didn't even have to spend money. I didn't have to do anything. I was just giving of myself.
Exactly. And I think what's really important with that is that you started where you were with the capacity that you had. And because you gave to something that was bigger than yourself or outside of yourself, your capacity grew.
Yeah.
And even without your awareness, while you were serving on a small scale, which was like something that almost everyone does, babysits or helps another neighbor or whatever, because you were serving at that level, your capacity started growing. And then it led you to start being able to do all of these other things along with the skills that you already had. And so again, I think that's like a perfect segue into this last question is when you're scaling social change. So now we're going from babysitting the 2 girls to making changes around the world, the conversation we started off with, which is making changes in a whole nother country. How can leaders ensure that the process remains efficient and productive, both for the organization and for the individuals as they're trying to scale the change, right? That's a different animal when you're trying to scale. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, so I remember when I first started my work, I met a woman named Helen Kelly Hunt, and she had just written a book called Faith and Feminism, where she had kind of like fused those 2 together. And I was ready to, creating this movement of Muslim women, and because I wanted to, show that my faith does not restrict women from interpreting nor expressing their faith, and that women's suffering is often wrongfully attributed to Islam. So I wanted to change that. That was the
Right.
passion that I had. I came with that passion. And I remember telling her, I want to do this. And she said, "Who are you? You're just one person." She said, "Have you heard of the suffragettes?" I said, "Who are they?" Because I had not studied American history. And then she explained to me how these women were literally sitting at their kitchen table making these, napkins and things where they were like crocheting things and sharing messages with one another until enough of them got together and created enough of, like a little army of women coming together and then going out there and creating the declaration and asking for the vote and so on and so forth. And it was a gradual thing. She said, "You need more women like you because numbers matter." And
Right.
I never forgot that. And I still repeat that to others. I said, you can't create the change by yourself. Even the messengers weren't able to do the changes. They needed apostles, right?
Right.
They
Exactly.
needed their companions, their 10, 15 people that
Right.
had their back.
Right.
Like, I don't know a single leader that goes out there on their own. They always have people behind them. So who are your helpers? Who are your people who encourage you? Who are the people that keep you on message? Who are your supporters and your anchors?
Right.
So that could be within the family, and it can be these are your closest network of people that keep you grounded. So I created Wise literally with that message, and I brought 200 women together,
Wow.
200 women around the world that were like me,
Okay.
and they were all doing work individually, and they were never connected by anybody.
Right. So you
I
took that
brought them
story.
together in 2006. And when 200 like-minded women came together, sparks began to fly.
Yeah.
Sparks began to fly. And then we were able to share with one another. And so this is how you create a ripple effect. This is how you create the change, is by this change through collaboration is
Yeah.
usually the best way. And that also has helped us in America, because when every time we try to create change here, when any kind of movement, all these movements come together, right? So you have the Black Lives Matter joining with this movement and that movement, and all these movements coming together and protesting. But I think that in those movements, there's still something lacking, and that is that it is not holistic enough.
Yes.
In,
Yeah.
in my opinion, it's not tapping into all the sectors of society that we need to go to. It's just a lot of energy being released, and you're letting your voices be known, but you're not able to sustain that change because it fizzles out. Eventually, people have to go back home. That's where you need the leader. And so
Exactly.
that's the other thing, is that leaderless movements never survive for very long.
Right.
And so we have to go back to thinking that every movement is led by a leader. So identify the leader who's got a commitment to the cause, and stay behind that leader and help that leader, and have other people join forces. This is how you create long-term sustainable change.
Wow. Wow. Well, with that note, I think we're gonna end our conversation there. This has been a
I'm
great
sorry to end
conversation,
it.
Dr. Khan.
I'm
No.
enjoying it.
But you've given us so many nuggets to think about and to contemplate. And I love the model to educate, to collaborate, to communicate, and then to take action and have
To take
action
action.
steps. And you
Yeah.
think about it, it really does create that four-pronged stool, or that chair that provides that stability, because you've spent time doing the research, and it's not just educating by yourself, but it's collaborating, educating, it's in sharing concepts, testing the theories. Does this really narrow things down? Applying the stories and taking this research that's been done, and putting it into a 2-page pamphlet that an eighth grader could the essence of the message,
Exactly.
which is great, and then being able to communicate that, and it makes it easy to communicate, and then it makes it easy for people to take action. So if someone wanted to learn more about you, to read your books, to watch your other programs,
I'm available. I am available very easily available. If you just Google Daisy Khan, daisycon.com is going to come up, which is my first name, last name.com. That's my website. There's an info@daisycon.com. You can send me an email to that. I have several books. My book is called 30 Rights of Muslim Women. It's on Amazon. I have a memoir called Born with Wings, which is also available. And I have a third book called Wise Up, Knowledge Ends Extremism. And so reach out to me for anything. I am here to engage with the public. And, you mentioned creating change in communication. Recently, people have been listening to a lot of podcasts and getting the information from podcasting. So people keep telling me, well, why aren't you on a podcast? Because, I've always tried to be up with technology and, creating the website, doing the trainings, going online. And now also I'm listening to people that are telling me I need to start a podcast so I could communicate this information through podcasting. So yeah, even I have to embrace new ways of communicating. Yeah. So always staying adaptable. Adaptability is so key in the change management work.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Khan, it has been a pleasure to spend this time with you, to speak with you, to learn from you and to hear your stories. And I'm so inspired and intrigued. And I really look forward to this podcast coming out and being able to share it with you and your community. And hopefully we'll be able to have another conversation down the road here about some of the other books and things that you're doing and about your podcast and what.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Okay.
If you're enjoying the content and finding it valuable, we would appreciate it if you could take a moment and leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us and helps us reach a wider audience. If you leave us a 5-star review, it would mean the world to us. Not only does it help us improve the podcast, but it also helps us attract more sponsors and grow our community. Thank you again for your support and for listening to the Productivity Smarts podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to Productivity Smarts, where we help you achieve your goals and live your best life. We hope you've gained valuable insights and actionable strategies to boost your productivity and increase your happiness and fulfillment. Remember to apply what you've learned and keep striving towards your goals. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring episodes and expert advice from our host, Gerald J. Leonard. Until next time, keep pushing forward and unleashing your productivity smarts.